I've been putting off going back to Kabul for a long time now, but I finally took the trip. And the interactions I had with everyone there put into perspective what is real Afghan culture from the fear based brand of the culture we follow here in the States. I can see why so many young Afghans have been scared off by the intimidating standards of the culture, enforced by finger shaking, eye bulging elders who were so consumed by the fear of their children becoming bad that their system of reward and punishment lost its reasonability and became a line in the sand warning system, fueled by possessiveness and paranoia, rather than a level minded concern for another's well being. Psychologically, the Afghan culture here became a negative stressor in the minds of youth and was consciously and subconsciously avoided at every turn. Ambivalence ensued, and the Afghan identity here became like a tree with withering roots, slowly dying, propped up only by egotistical gestures and dogmatic beliefs. On the other hand, my trip to Kabul helped me realize that for all the issues that the people of Afghanistan have, feeling confused about their identity is not one of them. And the reason is that even though the buildings and infrastructure were destroyed, the social order had not been disrupted, and their cultural roots were still strong. The values and ideals that the parents expect of their children are shared among friends and colleagues alike, and are even enforced by the courts. Because of this uniformity, it's easy to distinguish between the standards of the culture and the restrictions of the individual. In other words, there are enough people there that a system of social checks and balances begins to take effect, whereby the eccentricities of the individual are balanced out by the collective interest. But if you live abroad and the only exposure to Afghan culture you have is the one practiced by your own family, it's easy for unhealthy behavior to go unchecked for long periods of time, and for the insecurities of an elder to be disguised as cultural norms in a desperate attempt to maintain control of the household. Afghans are accustomed to silently swallow blood rather than to seek help in fear of what others may say. Most people dealt with the challenges of the new world by suppression and avoidance. Psychologically, this is the worst possible way to deal with something, because it leads to what's called cognitive dissonance, an instability of the mind arising from two contradictory beliefs. These types of behaviors feed a basic part of an individual called the shadow self. And when enough people are afflicted, the shadow becomes part of the collective unconscious, creating a shadow culture, one that is more likely to don black garb and communicate through negative reinforcement, rather than to come from a place of understanding and encouragement. They say that those who not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Ironically, many of our parents were around our age when war broke out in Afghanistan in 1979, and it was the excuse they were waiting for to escape the stifling small-town conditions of lack of social mobility and being at the bottom of the food chain within the family. Many escaped in the middle of the night and risked everything to go somewhere where they can make decisions freely and exercise their will. America was the great escape in the 1980s and was very accommodating to Afghans because we helped them bring down their arch enemy. And when many Afghans arrived here, they immediately got jobs and many partook in the government's good charity. The children were enrolled in schools, and by the late 80s and early 90s, things were getting better for everyone. For years, everyone was sharing stories of how they got here, how they escaped with the smuggler and went over mountains, through the valleys, crossed raging rivers, only to come here with a few bucks in their pocket and make it big. I remember parties almost every weekend, Afghan concerts every couple of months, and endless mimonis, melas, and family trips. I would say that from 1988 to about 1998 was a golden age of sorts for Afghan Americans. There was a lot of optimism as families rode the waves of good fortune in America, buying homes from working in all-cash businesses like cabs, food carts, and fine carpets. On the surface, things were really good then, but the core of the community was starting to weaken. The over-optimism got to people's heads, and they lost touch with their humble origins. The values of Afghan culture were trampled upon by careless acts of ambition. They say success tests a person's mettle more than poverty, because the more options you have, the more bad decisions you can make. Furthermore, the Afghan psyche had never been tested against the values of a free society, and was not accustomed to the responsibility that comes with freedom of choice. At a time when everyone was so Afghan, it was the thing to be more, quote, American, or at least an Afghan's idea of what's American. Some even considered the fact that their children didn't speak Dari or Pashto as a sign of their progressiveness. That sort of thinking was rampant then, and understandably so, because at a time when everyone was playing out their desires, no one was really thinking enough to consider the long-term effects of their actions. Then that pivotal moment happened, September 11, 2001. As a New Yorker, I can tell you that there wasn't a facet of life that was not affected by that event. As an Afghan, I'd be preaching to the choir if I said anything at all. What I can say is that no one was expecting to be put in the sort of positions they were put in as a result of the war and terror. To find yourself the enemy in the country you grew up in is a mind job, to say the least. I know many Afghans made a lot of money as a result of the war, but that's all they made. Our people don't have the vocabulary to understand psychological trauma and emotional shock. They ran away the last time they were faced with a hard decision, so guess how prepared they were to handle this one? Fight or flight, they call it. Now you can understand why you feel like the hyphen in the middle. They say if something is true, then its opposite can also be true. Why give in to the empty feeling of having no identity when you have it within you to be the best of both worlds?